Welcome to our Thoughts On series. This one is about the Birth, the Complete Human Experience podcast we recorded with Lindsey, the founder of BirthFit. And we did that over in Austin, Texas, in her lovely little house. It was I found it interesting. Let me start that. having experienced birth.
Having experienced birth
fairly recently, and I guess it's a sort of a weird thing to talk about birth, being two guys.
Well, I don't think anything's weird to talk about because it's just your experience of your personal experience of an experience, and you're one half of the reason it happened. So,
yeah, I would like to think so.
Hopefully,
I think just it's considered such a female thing. Oh, he's fine. It's considered such a female thing, birth. Like, it's all about the... How do you say it without
well, let's say it a different way. We're two dudes with our own experiences, and, one of us has been through a birth experience, which is you, and the other one hasn't.
Yeah.
So it's our reflections on the birth process. That's what it is. We're not trying to say that it's anything else other than that.
Yeah, and
so that's why I thought the conversation was interesting, was because it felt very cathartic for you, like the conversation in the same way that the Arthur Joseph one did for me.
Yeah. And it was. For me, I think
it's pretty obvious it was.
However old Esky was at the time.
8 or 9 weeks, I think you said.
8 or 9 weeks.
Podcast.
And we'd gone away for 2 weeks. Subsequently now, obviously, Luce and I heard an interesting thing about birth, and that post-birth, it is like a blowing open of life itself. And men and women process it really differently. And when we were talking or having a session with an osteopath and doing breath work, they were saying that men and women have to process it very differently. And almost there's a split, and the man goes to one, he goes questing out in one way, and the mum goes questing out in another. And it's really important to allow that to happen. And us going away felt like me questing out,
right,
to really just to connect with
an ancient ritual in a modern way,
and connect with an ancient ritual in a modern way. Yeah, I mean, I think that if we hadn't done that trip, and I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to go on that trip with the blessing of Luce, actually, it would be a very different experience now. Like you're almost in the pressure cooker and you can't leave. And then returning back to England from that trip, I was in such a different headspace, because we could have, it allowed me to blow off steam, but in quite a different way.
Yeah, I would, from a third party looking in, Lucy's birth was long. It was, to some degree, quite a traumatic experience from the conversation I was having with you for you, and talking about just you at this moment. And I guess you're experiencing that, and then you're having to stay within it because you're not getting a chance to break, in the way that an animal shakes off their trauma. It's like you're going through the experience, it's really traumatic, and then all of a sudden the baby's here and you're not actually getting the chance to shake that out. So going away kind of, I guess, allowed you to kind of shake that out. It allowed you the space to be able to come back, having cleared it,
Yeah. There are so many differing viewpoints on all of this, I think, and how it comes to me, having only done it once, but this, not a reliance, but there's an accepted norm that is this nuclear family, and then from that point on you do everything together, and you move in this way that in any other scenario would be seen as completely inefficient, not holding each person in their highest, and that's almost, okay, you now have a baby, you all do everything together all of the time. And that having done a little bit of that, it just doesn't, well, this accepted norm that then people feel that they should do something in a certain way feels like it creates loads and loads of burying of problems, like suppressing a bunch of stuff, when actually you just almost want to let things come up. What I've experienced, Eski's now nearly 6 months, and I've heard people say this before, like babies are like a mirror to, and I've equated that to, they're a mirror to everything that you haven't dealt with in your past. It seems to come up. And you can either keep on suppressing it, but you know it's going to flip somewhere down the line. So you can start processing before you have a baby. And Luce and I were very proactive in that, to not take forward as much of the ancestral baggage as we could. And we were going through a bunch of stuff independently at that point. Then we have a baby. And then even then it throws up all of these things, like, why am I responding like my dad did, or like my mum did? And you find yourself not actually being you unless you're prepared to go and deal with it. And I think that it sort of links back into Lindsey. They're talking about birth in a really honest way, in a non-isolatory way. It's not just birth, it's the motherhood transition, which is preconception to postpartum and all parts in between. And it involves different parts of individuals and respecting each part of it.
I think hearing you thinking about it, they're allowing it to be the way it should be for the individual, as opposed to what society is saying, which is it has to be like this, and then post the birth it has to be like this, and this is what has to happen in these various steps, which is okay, but probably works for some people, and that's totally fine, and there becomes a way because so many people link into a way, but then it disrespects the fact that not everyone is going to always link into that way. And actually we're individuals, and there's an individual way to do things. And even with the birth plan, Lindsey talked about how they find words. Embo talked about having a fun birth. And so that's the environment they try to create to ensure that happens. And that was very particular and specific to her, and someone else has a different word in a different way. And it's just kind of allowing it to be, rather than applying all of society's pressures and all of society's stories about this is the way it's got to be. It's like, no, the way it's got to be is the way that's right for me and my partner, you and Luce in this occasion.
And that's where...
But some people really struggle with that because they can't get over their own stories of, but what do you mean you did it like this? But that's not how you should do it. And it's like, no, the way I should do it is the way that I want to do it.
My experience of that was the people that bring their baggage are everyone else in that room.
Yeah, precisely.
That all have their own, they've all learnt a way. And I can remember saying to...
This is why the podcast felt very cathartic.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think maybe people don't talk about it enough. You only ever hear the horror stories, and I'll always say it was like going into battle, but it was also the most beautiful experience ever, because in that moment, it showed me the potential Lucy and I have to deal with this kind of energy. And people, so back to where my head was, which it's slightly forgotten, being in that space and saying to people, everything that you've been taught, you don't need to do it straight away. But people want to, and they want to instill almost what they've learnt. You see it when I was a little kid and I'd have read a book. All I'd want to talk about was what I'd read, that kind of paragraph or whatever, rather than thinking it, processing it, discarding and sort of learning the principles. When someone else, they don't need to hear that bit, but people want to push what they know, and then you end up with this conflicting opinions, and it becomes a really... Well, other people bring their, I'm going to call it shit, into the situation when you just don't need it.
Well, people are very keen on the phrase, you should learn from other people's lessons. It's such a shallow point of view because it really robs you of your experience and of your understanding of your growth. You should be allowed to have the experience. You should be allowed to reflect on it. You should be allowed to process it, and then you should be allowed to turn it into, some wisdom that you bring forward should you decide to have another baby, or just into life in general. You don't have to have a birth, and that knowledge is only confined to having another birth. And it really robs people if they're not allowed to go through the experience in the way that they want to go through it. Of course, you're there. I mean, I'm talking third party here because I haven't experienced it, but you're there and to take guidance from other people, and that's your prerogative to say, we need help, please give me the guidance. Thanks for the guidance. I will take that, process it, and do with it as I wish. It's not thanks for the guidance, this is now what we're going to be forced to do. It's almost like you're under pressure at your most vulnerable moment in your life, to do something. And of course, I guess it then becomes very enshrouded in fear because it's very tangible, life and death. And, I guess it's a real talent that everyone needs to learn to some degree to be able to come and present the information and present it in a very matter of fact way and allow the people to do what it is that they want. I think your experience is quite unique. I would say that your experience is very truthful. You personally aren't really afraid to say what you think. So, you talked about how, you saw Lucy in pain, and the obvious candidate to blame for that was Esky, and how that made you angry at Esky. And I remember thinking at the time, like, oh, dude, you're gonna have to let go of that one. It's not gonna serve you. But at the same time, it's like, okay, cool. This is what I think, but like, you need to work that one out yourself.
Yeah.
And sure enough, you do, given the time. But I'm sure there were many people that were like, you can't think like that. And it's like, why can't I think like that? It's a protective thought process. It's not a hateful thought process. It's protective. And by the way, we're now 70 hours with no sleep, and it's really traumatic. And what can we do? But it's like, cool, there's no problem. Think like that. Dwell on it, reflect on it, process it, come back to it. Talk. I think Lindsey suggested in it, it's so important to then post-birth have a conversation between the two of you that went through it, the two key players, the two main actors in the whole experience, to talk through it and probably unbeknownst to you, release some areas or some things that happened.
Yeah, and we've started to do that now, and I actually feel me going away at that time was great for me. I think it gave Luce some space just to get her head around it. But there's also this weird thing. It's not a weird thing. This judgment where everyone's had their own experience, and it feels like it's just this domino effect. It's like, I've had the experience based on the crap that I was given, and I'm going to project that onto that person that's going through this, and they're going to take that and project it onto the next person. You've got this cascade, and it really feels like that whole process is a cascade of things. And they talk about birth being or if you go on to like a drip, and I might be getting this wrong for anyone who's super medical, etc., but you have this like cascade knock-on event. So you have the painkiller, and the oxytocin drip, which leads to this, which leads to this, which invariably, so I understand, leads to an emergency cesarean. And like everything is pushing, like these cascades they only go one way, it seems. And it's into a deep dark hole where, right, cool, there you go, there's a baby, and you've got to sort all your shit out, and you've just had major abdominal surgery, but crack on.
Yeah.
And it's like, fuck, all of these things, and it is so raw for me, because it felt the whole process was not pro the mother. It was about ticking boxes in an Excel spreadsheet. And I did say that to the medical staff at the time, and they were quite shocked, and then they admitted it. They were like, well, yeah, we're trying to juggle the beds. And it's like, if you hold the mum in her highest, because actually we all want to deliver a happy, strong, healthy baby and a happy, strong, healthy mother. If you hold that in your highest and check all your ego and your judgment and your baggage at the door until it's needed,
Mm-hmm.
and trust that if you give people space, they'll be able to make their own decision that's a well-informed decision based on the facts and the information that have been presented at that point in time. It felt to me that if that environment was fostered and created, it would be a very different experience, and one that wouldn't need so much backtracking and post-therapy and, all of this stuff that's never released, never processed. It's just done for time, which is weird. And I can remember we were there, we were in the room, Lucy was, having contractions, and like none of it makes sense how hospitals work and sometimes hospitals do a great thing, but birth is the most natural thing. Women are these absolute power sources, but they require a certain environment to allow them to drop into that zone, to go primal. But the lights will be flicked on, and then this tends to be a bloke who's the surgeon, whisks in, and it really got my goat when this guy came in. He was the senior registrar, kind of like just cocksure, thought he was it felt like he was like, I know everything. It's like, no, you know how to do a very specific, very important procedure when it's necessary. But all you want to do is use that. And what they did do, they instilled fear at every point, and it just made me not want to listen to medical staff again. Like they seem to do themselves no favors, because it was like, this is going to happen anyway, so you might as well do it. It's like, well, how do you know? You're just creating that environment for someone. You're making them scared, as opposed to just being there when it's necessary. I want to see that person. And the surgeon that actually went ahead with the C-section, which even after 76 hours, it was an elective cesarean. Wasn't the emergency cesarean caused by a cascade of events. And I think that's really important. Distinguishing factor for me and for Luce on how we view the birth of Esky. It was Lucy's decision. The options were narrowing at that point, but it was her decision, so she can go, I made the decision, as opposed to it being taken out of her hands. And what tends to happen when things happen like that, particularly with the medical staff, panic, fear, rushing, slice, rip, pull out, and you end up with all these horrendous things. And it was just like, Lucy decided, which was one of the most brave decisions I've seen a person take. I mean, I was in tears because I felt like I'd failed her by not being able to create that environment. So you're going through all of this stuff, but the surgeon was fantastic. It was a female surgeon at this point, and she'd been a bit pushy, as they are, because they felt like they're under time pressure, resource pressure. And she said, any questions? And at this point, I was probably public enemy number one in the hospital. She said, any questions? And all I wanted to know is, are you really good at what you're doing? And for me, I'm a person that will fall asleep in a dentist chair because I trust my dentist. And she said, yes, if there'd been any hesitation in that answer, it'd be like, you're not doing it. I think it's really important that at that time, it's like she had the skills, she could do it, but don't press it on someone all the time and go, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. Because this kind of judgment and fear, and it felt really inhuman. I feel like I've gone on a little bit of a rant. But it is super raw. We're still working it out. I wonder how many other people don't then talk about things like that.
Hence hence Lindsey's wisdom of saying, have you guys sat down and talked it out, and maybe there's an argument, there's a case that you could bring in like a third party therapist to go to help that process too, to ask the poignant questions, whatever they needed to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the more, I think birth and death, last year was particularly wild. My dad died, and then Esky was born, and Esky's due date was my dad's birthday. Things couldn't have happened more I don't know, symbolically than that. So all of these things were heightened, and then like this idea of birth and death, how we just don't talk about it, how we shy away from those experiences, and yet they're the most amazing experiences that we'll have. And funnily enough, Charlie Dark said, I think there were 4 things that everyone should do, 2 of which wasn't it witness a birth and I feel like witness death, but not in a bad way, just those 2 things. I think you kind of have to know where you've come from and where you're going to make things make sense, and realise how incredibly strong you are, how actually we need both men and women, and how everything's being a little bit cockeyed and just put out of sync. It's like, man protects the cave, wicked. You can totally do that. Other bits, it's like it's a challenge. And there's a famous, I don't know what he is, doctor, surgeon, Michel Audin, who's this French guy, and his kind of advice is just to women was, shut the door, don't let anyone in, and just go and do what you do naturally. And kind of, because your body can do it, you've just got to be able to drop into that space. And our head rules. There's so many decisions, so many thoughts, so many just the head, it scrambles loads of stuff.
Did Lucy do I don't know if she did birth it, but
Lucy did hypnobirthing.
No, sorry. So Lucy did hypnobirthing.
Well,
I was going to talk about the fitness aspect of it. I know that Lucy was training prior to...
Lucy had a personal trainer, and I think that the physical state she was in, or physical condition as opposed to state, was testament to her ability to look pretty fresh-faced, even after no sleep, after 80 hours. It was quite remarkable. And
obviously
she'd followed Elisa Vitti's protocol, the Women Code protocol. So Elisa, we featured in issue 2, and you met her with Lucy in New York. So she was following that, working with an osteopath and a trainer.
So that's interesting, because that's 3 of BirthFit's 4 pillars.
The only one.
Mindset is hypno. Mindset is hypno. Is that? Could you say?
Yeah, possibly. I feel like BirthFit go a bit more into that. Hypno was very... They're talking to you in a way... I don't know. That's too... sequential.
Yeah.
I think my experience of... Luce had a physical body that could cope with a number of stresses and strains. Her body was full of the nutrients.
Yeah,
to
nutrition.
draw on
You guys are.
You know,
Yeah.
she was hot on, and she, you know, followed the Woman Code protocol. And luckily for us, there was kind of no planning. Birth just happened, but it wasn't. Nothing was being overthought, other than it felt like Luce was living into her potential,
Right.
of being a fit, happy, strong, healthy woman.
Yeah.
You know, and as a result of that is you are
Yeah.
fertile and you are all of those things.
Yeah.
But I don't know where mindset. I think mindset. My understanding of talking to Lindsey in that podcast, I think it goes a little stage further.
Yeah.
That hypno. I mean, we had a hypno class. It lasted a day, but it's almost like what were we liking some kind of training to? It's like, cool, train for 3 hours, then you get this qualification, you can go and open this thing, and you're like, what? You know, it's maybe there's too much information,
Right.
because female bodies they're just created in an amazing way that can do all this stuff. But when you try and mechanize something,
Yeah.
it's simply overthought.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, okay, giving birth is as natural as breathing. You might only do it a few times, but your body, everything is designed
to do it.
to
Yeah.
do it. Same with breathing. It's like, right now, think mechanically about all the processes that require breathing. You stop breathing.
Yeah.
The brain takes over, and just felt like that. So I think I'd love to know more about Lindsey's or BirthFit's mindset protocol, but it feels like they're on the language they use supports the mums to be in a really it supports the mums to be to do what they were.
Funny enough, Lindsey's coffee mornings. Coffee talk, sorry, not coffee mornings. Coffee talk today is on the power of voice. It's coming up a lot. I speak to Naomi Absalom this week. We were talking about the power of voice as well.
Yeah.
Like what you say, do other people understand your words the way that you're giving out your words or expressing your words?
Yeah. Yes. Just trying to go back into that time. Yeah, when you're lazy with the words, the output becomes lazy.
It becomes it becomes lazy. It becomes sloppy, doesn't it?
And then you're constantly battling sloppiness to try and rectify it, bring it back. No, that's not quite what I meant, but well, what did you mean?
Fewer, more meaningful, considered words.
Yes. Particularly in the moment of high pressure. What I did realise during the birth process was our ability to deal with pressure.
Right.
And how many people don't get to experience that or shy away from pressure or that ability to make decisions under duress, under physical or mental duress, when you have to hold you just have to hold the line on what you believe in.
Yeah.
And actually it's always about moving it forward, and there's no right or wrong. Something either works or it doesn't work, and just being able to be there. And that's why I say it was a beautiful experience for Luce and I, or particularly for me, because it showed to me how when shit's going on all around us, Luce and I could just be really present to talk about something, one person going through it, the other person not, merely watching, and creating a space where the decision can be made by the person who needs to make the decision, with the support of, in this case, the support of me. And I think that's invaluable.
Yeah.
And just how important pressure is. And I wonder if all of the practices that we've been doing, it's funny, in yoga this morning, my teacher said, you've got real mental strength. I don't know, we're doing back bends or something. It's like, well, we're in it, aren't we? I'm in it. If I say let's do it, it means let's do it. I've thought about it.
Committed to it.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's commit to that. But all things like getting into the ice, being able to have those cold showers, to deal with stuff, and then you realise that it's not such as big an issue as everyone else is whipping it up to be around you.
Yeah.
And I hazard a guess that when you watch any of the greats in anything, sport or whatever, they can almost stop time. They're fully in the present moment.
Yeah. Flow.
And I was going to say, and there's no other. Well, there are other things, but births whacks you in the present moment. I mean, 80 out, I hadn't got a clue what day it was. Days were irrelevant. We were just in there. Food was irrelevant. It was selflessness, timelessness, all of those. Effortlessness, maybe not for loose, but she was just flowing. I mean, you're in it. You're there.
Yeah.
Amazing experience, and one that we are 6 months on, naturally still processing, and actually we haven't spoken about it really. We've kind of done our own things. I know I went into coming back from this trip like in a full phase of all I want to do is kind of go out and hunt and get in the cold sea and lift weights and really kind of assert that masculinity there, because it all becomes about, I think you naturally default, I think you become who you are.
Yeah.
And when it would become challenging is, it's like there's man's work and there's woman's work, and play to your strengths. And that doesn't mean you're you're ducking out of anything. It's just like, this is what I do really well. This is what you do really well. If we do that, and that was the point I was making about, at that point with that nuclear family, it's like, oh, we must all do everything together. It's like, no, I need to go out and hunt. You need to go and do this. If we just go and do that, we'll be quicker. We'll be quick, and we can come back and join.
Yeah. And
then we can move forward, and you naturally, there's like an expansion and a contraction, or a going out, coming back, going out, coming back.
Yeah.
It's moving forward. It's like a concertina.
Yeah.
Rather than, let's just go to the lowest common denominator, which tends to be fear. It's like, there isn't time to be fearful.
Yeah.
There is only time to act.
Yeah.
And if we're going to act, then let's act on our strengths, our individual strengths. That will move us forward. And that's probably how I view being a couple and a mum and dad.
Makes sense.
And that perhaps challenges other ways, or maybe the norm, the convention. It's like, we've got limited time on this earth. We need to do what we're good at. And Liz was with her breathwork osteo yesterday, and she was saying, evolution is such that evolution doesn't care about the mum, because the mum's done her job. It's then about the future generation. It's about the baby. So the baby's just drawing through breastfeeding, just sucking the life out of the mum. So the mum has to keep fed, topped up with nutrient dense food, because the baby's just pulling out, because that's new life. And it's a crazy thought.
No, I don't think so.
Well, it's not, but it maybe in our society now, where everyone is just different viewpoints, and everyone should have the right to do everything, and etc., etc. And it's like, people are really good at what they do. Doesn't mean you're good at something else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And maybe then you end up in sort of the world where we're at now. Where people are becoming confused by certain things.
Maybe. Time to wrap up. If you haven't already listened to Lindsey's short form podcast, on reflection, that's also a really fantastic podcast. Lindsey has a daily practice on reflection that she makes live on her Instagram stories. That's worth checking out. Absolutely worth checking out. And that follows on from the Ron Calc podcast we released last week. So, yeah, we have 2 podcasts live with Lindsey at the moment that are definitely worth the listen. Until next week. Cheers.
Thanks.